This is Tromie Bridge and the River Tromie. I'm at the start of an overnight walk up Glen Tromie to have a look at the regenerating pine forest here, and then, if the weather's suitable, go up onto the hills above the glen and follow those back and then back down to here. But we'll see how I get on. Regeneration in Glen Tromie. All the trees you can see up on the hillside there, the small ones, and the fewer number of them, but those in the foreground as well, have all sprung up since Wildland, the conservation charity, took over the estate. And it is wonderful to see all this regeneration, all these young trees, and you can see some of the remaining older forest up there. Good morning. I'm camped in, I suppose, Upper Glen Tromie. I reckon this is far enough to be called the Upper Glen, by a small lochen. In fact, I'm on one of the banks surrounding it, and I suspect from the regularity of the banks that this is artificial, though I don't know that. I'll have to see if I can find out. I am not far below the route or the slopes of Mialach Moor, a corbett that I'm hoping to go up. I've been up it once before, but it was so long ago I remember little about it, and also I approached it from the other side, the Glenfeshie side, so I've never been up here before. According to the maps, there's no path, and I think lower down it's going to be quite strenuous heather bashing. The slopes are quite steep, so it's only a short horizontal distance to the summit, but a fair amount of vertical climbing. And then, if the wind isn't too strong, I'm intending walking along the ridge paralleling Glen Tromie and then back down to where I began, as this is just an overnight trip. The night was windy with some showers. There was a lot of rain on the outside of the tent this morning, but despite the huge vent, which you can see behind me, which you can't close, but does have a big awning to keep off the rain, which it did, it doesn't of course keep off the wind, so you sit up and can feel the wind blowing against your head. However, it still didn't prevent much condensation, and whilst this is described as a 1.5 person tent, it's really only big enough for one, especially given that, you know, the walls at each end are quite steep, so it's hard to avoid contact with them. It does have a huge porch, which is great for storing gear. I got my pack on one side down here, the stove over here. I'm still got room to get in and out without, you know, having to move anything. The stove I'm using is the actual Jetboil Stash stove, which I haven't used for quite a while. But having used it in a, you know, to test it against the new Primus Light Ultra stove, I thought I'd actually take it out for once. Mostly I've been using the Jetboil pot, which is excellent and arguably the best heat exchanger pot available for solo use. It's certainly the lightest. But I say I've mostly been using this pot with stoves like the Soto Windmaster or the MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe, which are much better in windy weather, in cold conditions, or when the canister is virtually empty, as they're regulated stoves. This isn't regulated and also doesn't have any sort of wind protection. However, here in the porch it has worked okay. It was maybe slightly sluggish this morning, but then the temperature overnight fell to 5.8, which is quite cool for the second half of July, given that I'm camped at just below 400 meters, so not that high up at all. However, it did boil, which is fine, and yesterday it was fast when the temperature was more like 14 degrees. And for supper last night I had another 5 minutes to deli meal, the pav bhaji, which is a potato based meal. It's very spicy and very tasty. That's another one that I'll get again. There were also midges last night, despite the breeze. There are a few this morning, so I have had a coil burning, and when I haven't needed access to the porch, I've had the mesh door closed. The mesh door, certainly, as you can see, there's lots of space, but unfortunately, as with other tents, new tents that I've tried this year, although you can open both halves of the fly sheet, you can't open half the mesh door. And again, as with other tents, I'd rather see a T-zip, so that if the wind's coming from that direction and you open this side of the fly sheet door, you can have access to it directly through the inner and not at an angle. But these single U-shaped zips seem to be popular at the moment, as do fly sheet doors that open both sides. So from that point of view, I just have to accept it, but I don't think it's a good design. This was the first time I've used this tent other than pitching it at home to see, you know, what it was like. It's standing up to the breeze, which isn't that strong, fairly well, but the fact that it's a bit like a wind tunnel with, I've got the half the fly sheet zip undone. I call it the fly sheet, but this is a single skin tent, so it isn't really a fly sheet as such. But certainly I've got the porch door half open. Wind is coming in this, going straight through and out there. It's reasonably warm now, about 14 degrees, so that's not really a problem. However, my conclusion, I think, given that despite the breeze there was a lot of condensation, it's hard to avoid. As you can see, I only have to move back slightly and my head is touching the bottom half of the inner, which slopes backwards from the pole. So the high point is here, right next to the pole. But once you move away from that, you can quickly, in any direction, come into contact, you know, with the inner and transfer any condensation to your hair. So I think really the design is quite roomy. It is, of course, very, very light. I think it's under 700 grams. I'll put the exact weight up on the screen because it pitches with trekking poles, 2 trekking poles, because there's one to hold up the awning above that mesh panel. So it's designed to ventilate well, but when it's really humid, and it was 100% humidity last night, which wasn't surprising because it had rained, the ground and vegetation were really wet. I was quite damp, gear was damp, and there were more showers after I pitched it. So, you know, high humidity was not a surprise. And those are not unusual conditions for the Scottish Highlands either. Overall, I think this is probably a great tent for warm, dry conditions, but not for cooler, wetter ones. So not really suitable, certainly not for prolonged use in the Scottish Highlands. I'd use it again for overnights with a better weather forecast than the current one, but I wouldn't take it on longer trips, you know, unless, as we were recently, if there's a heat wave and it's going to be bone dry with low humidity, then yes, but otherwise it's not really a tent for the Highlands. And in terms of the wind, I really wish there was some means of closing off this big mesh panel behind me, so it wasn't like a wind tunnel, because given there was so much condensation, I mean enough that at times it was dripping on me, it's not as though it stopped the condensation, and I don't think the condensation would have been much worse if it was closed. It's just there would have been less of a wind tunnel effect, and I would have had less shocks when I sat up with damp hair from the condensation and suddenly felt the cool breeze on me, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning. But still, finding out how it performs in, you know, different conditions is one of the things that if you test gear you need to do. And I think with this tent I have successfully done it. The other new item I was trying was this mat, which is the Summit Ultralight XR, and this, I have to say, is very comfortable. The ground I'm sleeping on is not completely flat, but this evens out the bumps successfully. It's very much this, you know, dimple pattern with deep gaps between all the different inflated sections, which means it adapts really well to the ground. So the mat, I think, is a success. I think it's just over 400 grams, slightly heavier than the lightest mat I've got, but still very light. It's also quite warm. It says it has sprung cells and it is insulated to some extent. I'll put the weight and the specifications up on the screen. Anyway, I think it's time to finish getting dressed, which means put on my still damp from last night trousers and socks, and go outside, do a bit of filming and photographing round the tent, and then pack up and head uphill and see what the rest of the day brings. Camp from the outside, and here you can see the odd shape of the String Ridge tent with this big awning at the back, under which is the big mesh panel. As you can see, I'm on the edge of a steep slope, so I can't actually stand behind the tent and take a photo or a video, but I will walk round this bit of it, mostly in deep heather, but I found this little grassy area on which I was able to pitch. You can see the big porch here, the sloping ridge of the tent, and again this strange shape. And looking up that way, you can see the hill I hope I'm going up. Somehow make my way through the heather, and hopefully, as always, higher up it'll be slightly easier going, though you can see there's some forest regeneration up there as well. Of course, it's only a bit over 700 meters high, so the tree line is probably not that far below the summit, the natural tree line, when overgrazing is removed. And here's this little lochen. There are masses and masses of sand martins zooming over the water, and then round to look over Glen Tromie to Meal Cur, a Munro that rises above Dalwhinnie, and there's the track up Glen Tromie and the view back down the glen, and then around to my camp, which, as you can see, is surrounded by regenerating rowans and a birch over there by the lochen. And now it's time to pack up the tent, which I think has dried completely, which is great, as there's been no rain since I woke up, and there is this breeze to dry it out. Anyway, this has been an excellent spot to camp, but now I must move on. This excellent cairn overlooks the lochen where I was camped at the north end, at the right end, looking down on it. And in the distance is Meal Cur, and then as the camera swings round, you can see Glen Tromie heading up towards the Gaiac Pass, and then the hill I was going up, Mylach Moor. It's too windy for filming on the tops. It's very windy indeed, but I found this sheltered spot on the east side of Mealach Beg. The wind is from the west, so it's only a light breeze down here. This is looking back to the Corbett, Mealach Moor, and then swinging round we get Mullet Clach of Lair above Glen Feshy, and then in the distance there, just being touched by the clouds, you can see Cairn Tal and Brereach, and then over Scorgui, which doesn't look anything much from here, and round to the last two hills on this ridge, which I'll be going over shortly, before descending down to Glen Tromie and back to the car. It's turned into a beautiful afternoon now, other than the wind. This is near the end of the trip. I'm shortly going to descend down to the road and back to Tromie Bridge and then the car park. It's been a great trip, tougher underfoot than I thought it might be. It's clear to see that not many people come over these hills. The bit of road you can see there is in the next glen. The distant hill there is the Corbett. And swinging round, you can see, I think this is replanting in this glen. Anyway, on down to the road, and hopefully it's clouding over now before it rains. I'm now on the road in Glen Tromie, looking back up at the woods I've just come through, which I photographed yesterday. So I've completed the circle and there just remains a couple of kilometres back to the car. So I hope you found my little walk in the Eastern Cairngorms interesting, and as always, if you did, please click on like, and if you have any comments, they're welcome, and any queries I'll try and answer them. Thank you for watching.